wildlife there, with future life. You're listening to Byte Into It on 3RRR. It's just gone 16 minutes past 7, and Vanessa, we've got someone in the studio with us.
We certainly do. How appropriate that we just heard about future life, because we are thinking about the future, and we've brought in Nate Kinch, who is a socio-technology ethicist and the founder of Trustworthy by Design, an organisation dedicated to helping leaders create trustworthy institutions that deliver positive social impact. It might sound like a whole lot of buzzwords now, but we know that Nate has a lot of ideas to back it up. Tonight he joins us in particular to discuss the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. Welcome back to the show, Nate.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. So we've got Dan Salmon, Dan Morganti, and I'm Vanessa Taholka, and I thought to reintroduce us on the way back in, so I thought I'd just contextualise everything. And Nate, you recently published a critique of venture capitalists Andreessen Horowitz's, who people might know as A16Z, their brand of techno-optimism, and you said, forget that, this is why we should all be techni-optimists, and this is an expression that I wasn't familiar with before this. Can you briefly first unpack for our audience what the A16Z manifesto covers and why you critiqued it?
That is a huge question.
It is huge. It is huge. We're going to start somewhere.
We absolutely do. So as you rightly said, Andreessen Horowitz, or A16Z, is one of the really big venture capital firms, founded by Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, hence the name. Both very successful entrepreneurs, big billionaires in their own right. And it was actually last year that they published the manifesto, and it took the tech world by storm. And as we're so used to nowadays, it was one of these very divisive pieces of content, or memes, if you will. And techno-optimism isn't something that they invented, or techno-solutionism. It's an idea that's been around for quite a while. And in really simple terms, it looks at almost all technology very favorably, and kind of gets a bit dogmatic about how good technology has been and how good it's going to be. And it sort of says, hey, we've got problems, we get that, but tech's here to save the day. And for those of us that try to develop a deeper, more nuanced understanding of our history as a species and how things messily come together and the real problems that matter in our world, we were sort of like, ooh, this is probably going to be more harmful than helpful. So I put together 6,000 words, which was probably as concise as it could have been, saying, hold up a sec, folks. Let's critically reflect on the claims that they're making. And if we are going to be hopeful about the possibility of betterment in the future, let's really ground that in the best of philosophy, the best of science, and kind of like important ideas like justice and equity and togetherness. And so that was the kind of spirit of it.
Mm. So Nate, what were the kind of claims that I do remember this happening last year, and I think we talked briefly about it on Breakfasters back in the day, but what were these kind of claims they were making about the amazingness of how technology is going to fix the world?
There were many, and it's a manifesto, so they're belief-based statements, right? So we take that with a pinch of salt, but I'll pick on just one, if that's all right, Dan. So there was a specific claim, and I think Mark Andreessen was probably the primary author. I'm sure it was a team effort, but I think it seemed like it was Mark. The big thing that I think sticks out most is that he makes a claim in the manifesto that we need to 1000x our energy usage. A little bit more nuanced than that, because what he actually says is we need to bring the rest of the world up to where the US is today. That would be about a 5-fold increase in energy usage. Then from there, the US will go up 1,000 times. Note the sequence of events here, very US-centric. And then the rest of the world catches up. So that would be a 5,000-fold increase in our energy usage. Now, I don't want to scare anyone, and I promise I am actively hopeful about our future, but just to ground this in sort of what we would refer to like biophysical literacy. If we did that, the waste heat alone, even if all of that net new energy came from solar, geo, wind, etc., would almost boil the oceans. So this huge claim that he makes, that technology is going to enable us to flourish and have abundance in ways that we've never had it is just so scientifically improbable, it's genuinely laughable. And there were some brilliant scholars and science communicators. I'm not an Earth system scientist, so I want to approach this with care. There are great Earth system scientists, biophysicists, etc., who very wholesomely critiqued it. And that's just one example, Dan, of how this belief that things will just keep getting better because of technology, it gets way out of whack with how we think the universe actually works. And when push comes to shove, that can get really dangerous for a lot of people.
Won't technology be able to come along and help us with that heat problem?
Carbon capture.
Yeah.
So now, this is a tech show, right? The relation between tech and society. I think we all have a deep appreciation for what science and the way it's been operationalized through technology, modern technology is brought into the world. So we should say that. I'm not trying to say, folks, let's go back to caves. And that sometimes happens. People are, oh, you're a Luddite, go back, just go back and live in the bush. It's not like that. But the problem with BACs and other carbon capture technologies is it's a little bit like the Techno-Optimist Manifesto. Big claims about what might be possible with close to no real empirical evidence to back it up. Lots of externalities when we look at the sort of third/nth order effects of what we're actually doing. And I think if we're saying something like, we're on a really precarious trajectory, maybe technology can help, and it almost certainly will. But we're better off placing our big bets on the stuff that we really know is going to work, i.e. massively reducing overall energy usage, material throughput, more equitably distributing what's left over, etc.
So A16Z's techno-futurism is technology will help us, especially if we're the ones to sell it to you. What would be your techno-optimism manifesto?
Look, a great question, Dan. And I don't know Mark. I don't know Ben. I don't know anyone at A16Z. So I don't want to try and judge their character. Now, I think there's often a relation between our character and our ideas, but I don't want to judge their character. The manifesto does, however, read just like that. So that's sort of that's everyone's interpretation, right? And I think their behaviours are good evidence that that's kind of their way of seeing the world. Now, I'll just define a few terms really quickly. So I think a really useful way to think of optimism is the belief things will be better. Pessimism, the belief things will be worse. Hope, belief in the possibility of better, and active hope, living your life based on that belief that you have that things can be better. So I am actively hopeful. Now, I believe that technology, like us, is almost like a relational artifact. We design it, it designs us. Now, there's lots of fancy philosophical or scientific ways I could describe that, but we exist in dynamic relation with this thing. Our values impact what we design. When we design it, it goes out into the world. We interact with it. There are emergent properties, so things happen that are kind of like different, unexpected, greater than the sum of their parts. And that forces us to reflect on our values and sometimes change our values. So I think it's really important to just ground my answer in that framing. I would say something like, humans have an incredible capacity for care, for connection, for collaboration and coordination because of our complex subjectivity, because of the nuance and technicality of our language systems, for so many reasons. And I think that most people are generally good. If we are able to step outside of, even just in thought experiments or in imaginative exercises or in ecologies of practice, if we're able to step out of the ideologies that often hinder our ability to imagine different futures, where we are more together, where everyone on the planet has really achieved material sufficiency. It's my belief that many different forms of technology, from the lowest, what we would think of tech, to the highest tech, synbio, all these different types of things, can be part of bringing us back into balance with the natural world and help us live more immaterially enriched lives, more free time, leisure. Remember that thing? Like, that used to be really important. Art, philosophy, music, different forms of creative expression, more time with our loved ones. I believe that all of that's possible. And I think the biggest thing that is probably going to be required of us is stepping outside of that context. And there's a beautiful quote, I didn't come up with it, I wish I did, that says, it's sometimes easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
What's interesting to me is that with this manifesto, Mark Andreessen et al. Were actually being their version of optimistic. You know, they
Yes.
were painting what they thought was an incredibly rosy picture. I think it might be helpful for our audience to know that a lot of the ideas have, align closely with those published earlier in a book called The Conservative Futurist, How to Create the Sci-Fi World We Were Promised.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's useful in almost a pop culture understanding way, because it just takes a little bit of looking at sci-fi films and sci-fi books and what have you to think there's lots of dystopian examples there, and there's lots of examples of people trying to design an ideal world and where things go wrong. And this blind faith in technology as a universal good, I'll say some key points of the manifesto include technology is the primary driver of human wealth and happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Like wealth being so tied up in there with a great objective. Viewing humanity as tech-empowered super species. Alarming. An ubermensch, if you will. No, let's not do it. Advocating for unchecked technological advancement. These are very strong positions on what technology can do. And I do wonder, to what extent, how does such an extreme ideology come out of a place where we think we've centered some of the smartest brains in the world? Silicon Valley self-touts itself this way. And no doubt they're attracting some very intelligent people to work there. But, what sorts of things are going on in the Silicon Valley bubble that you think, we might be able to defuse by not being in Silicon Valley, but also working in this space?
There's questions, that was a fractal approach to questioning. Brilliant, difficult to get at. So I think that was a beautiful observation that our predominantly dystopic orientation or utopic orientation, but within kind of like the narrow value system of he, and I say that deliberately, who accumulates most capital wins whatever the arms race tends to be. Like those are important observations, but I don't think we can possibly get into the historicity of the Silicon Valley philosophy. There are some great scholars who have done that work and approached it in different ways, and each output sort of has its individual merit. But the latter part of the questioning, I think, is more powerful. Like, so we're not in the Bay Area right now. So what can we do? And how can we do it in a way where we still see the people that are there as humans, like us, who have needs and wants and desires and fears and hopes, right? Because often when you take people's work, I'm wearing my glasses, not a hat, but their work glasses or their work hat off, they're fundamentally different people. So you put them in a system that has a narrow goal orientation, a corporation that says our job's to maximize shareholder value. And the best approximation for that is accumulating as much revenue or capital as possible. There you go. That's your orientation. That's your North Star. There are many things that people value that come into conflict with what they have to do, so they have a lot of moral dissonance. And that's actually a massive productivity eroder, right? So what can we do? We can try and look at the world from our unique perspective. So we're here in Melbourne's inner north, which is a very privileged place to live in many ways, incredibly socially progressive. I feel very grateful to be, my daughter's in the other room watching this in the green room. I feel very grateful to be raising her here and have that opportunity. We can look at the way that, say, we interact on the street. Like, you can walk down Brunswick Street as an example, and you see like every expression of humanity, and no one bats an eyelid, right? And that's just one example. It might sound a bit colloquial, but like, what can we do with that? What might, and I have some brilliant colleagues, Matt and Alia, who are working on a sort of like a social tech venture called Tethics, and they've done some wonderful work on something called rainbow mirrors, which is about how do we bring together genuinely diverse people into a safe participatory context to imagine not just like the ultimate good based on our narrow value system or all the things that could go wrong, utopia, dystopia, but the many possibilities that could enable our diversity to become our strength. And I think those are the types of things that we are able to do that it's really hard for folks in the Bay Area to do well.
We're speaking to socio-technology ethicist and founder of Trustworthy by Design, Nate Kinch, about his critique of Andreessen Horowitz's manifesto of technological optimism that they released last year, and picking up on this idea of diversity. Do you think that Silicon Valley does? I mean, we often see people of different, skin colors working in, higher areas in the Bay Area or in Silicon Valley, and that's touted as diversity. Is that the real diversity that they need to be able to get these ideas across, do you think?
It's a really important question, Dan. I want to approach it with care because the pigmentation in our skin probably has a lot to say about our historicity and has a significant impact often on the way we see the world and the way that we've been treated and the way that others treat us, and therefore the way that we look upon and value ourselves or love ourselves. So I think that is important. But is that all that diversity is? Almost certainly not. Colloquial example, you find two people who look kind of similar, have radically different views of even what is real. One could be a fundamentalist Christian, and I'm not saying that in a negative way at all, that could be their belief system, and other could be sort of like a hardcore reductionist, materialist, scientism type ideology, right? Like wildly different. So I think to answer your question, that does matter. What we are seeing, however, and I try and pay more attention to patterns than events for lots of different reasons, but when you look at the events, we are seeing most of the DEI teams in that sort of area having reduced funding. We are seeing most of the ethics teams being disbanded. And these are the folks that are supposed to explore value and values in a fairly pluralistic, cross-cultural way in an attempt to integrate that into how the organization operates. So the organizations are putting less money, which is a expression of what they really value, in the areas that you're talking about. And so I don't think they're doing enough in terms of skin pigmentation, skin color, etc. And I don't believe that's all of it. But for a period of time, they may have been going in the right direction. It looks like they've backtracked. And I think they could learn a lot about what genuine diversity and diversity as strength, as in like actively inviting diverse participation, leading to real benefit out in the world could be. There's a lot to be desired there.
Nate, how about we pull back to the big picture for a moment and how the Techno-Optimist Manifesto is framed as being the way to solve wicked problems, such complex problems that we're not sure what the ramifications and even the solutions that we attempt will be. You've written about how you're coming from a life-affirming value system, and that being the start of clear thinking on approaches to complex problem solving. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so that could be misconstrued depending on which part of the world we're in. So what I mean by life affirming is an attempt to ground your sense of value and meaning and purpose even in our best understanding of how life works within the biosphere. And very thankfully, we have quite a good understanding of that nowadays. Now, we have so much to learn, but we have quite a good understanding of how that works. Organisms reproduce, and the organism, being a thermodynamically open system, takes energy in. it grows, it goes through different developmental cycles, it reaches some type of maturity. It, within that context, engages in lots of different activities. And then things start to go downhill, and guess what? We die. That's how organisms work, and it's how kind of like systems and subsystems within the biosphere work to a greater or lesser extent. So we're trying to look at that, and there's a huge amount of work being done in the philosophy of science, but I'm not going to get into that because it's not the right form, that's looking at trying to bring in what we understand about organisms to give us a more complex and sort of nuanced philosophy of science, which I think is really, really exciting, and hopefully we experience some of those benefits. So we're basically looking at that and we're going, all right, so we're part of this incredible approximately 4 billion year, 3.5 odd billion year process on this planet. And oh my gosh, in the last 50 years, we have permanently extinct more species than the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. First of all, impressive effort. Claps all round, kudos to us. Like, that shows our power, but it also shows our lack of wisdom. And so we kind of, like, we're looking at all of that, right? And we're going, well, what would it take? What would we have to value? And what would we have to act in relation to in order to kind of like reverse that trajectory so that we can bring how civilization operates back within what is formally referred to as planetary boundaries, or like hard ecological limits? And how do we do that in a way that every person on this planet has what they need to fundamentally thrive? Now, incredibly complex sort of meta question, but that's where the value system comes from. And looking at it that way, the Techno-Optimist Manifesto is almost the opposite of that. And I think that's probably, in very simple terms, the single scariest thing about it.
So we've talked about individuals, but let's talk about corporations again for a moment, and organisations and governments and that sort of, big systems. What would you say to someone who says leading organisations are already engaged in purposeful work with their ESG strategies and environment, social governance?
There's a small smile on my face right now.
It's an obvious point.
I know. So look, okay. So I don't want to be. It's many good people working in these organizations genuinely trying to do good, right?
Yeah.
So that's really important framing, and it's easy to lose sight of that. But because I have the opportunity to interface with a lot of these folks, I see that they are good people. They care. They want their work to be meaningful and purposeful. They want their grandkids to have a better life than they had. So it's very, very similar to the way that we might think about this. I'm not going to get into ESG because to critically interrogate its benefits, and I say that lightly, and many of its shortcomings, it would take time. But the fact that this is even being discussed openly, like, that's some form of progress. The fact that we are looking not just at scope 1, but we're beginning to explore scope 2, 3, etc. We're looking at mandatory biodiversity reporting. These types of things are markers of progress. I think importantly though, Vanessa, that there's one body of research that I'll call upon here to just ground my answer. So in 2020, so it's a little while ago, and things may have changed a bit, right? But a group at MIT, led by Donald Sull, published a body of work where they looked at the relationship between corporate value statements. So this is when a corporate, I'm not going to pick on any corporation, but a corporation says we value integrity, honesty, or courage, or whatever it may be. And they do work to produce those things. That doesn't just come from nowhere, and there's often a pretty tight the distribution's fairly narrow. They're pretty similar sort of statements. Well, they looked at those, thousands of corporations in fact, and they said, well, how does that play out in the organization's culture, like the collective behavior of the organization or organism, right? They don't even think there's a statistical correlation between the two. So I often refer to this in my work as the ethical intent to action gap. A lot of people have great ethical intentions. A lot of people kind of have a good sense of what the good and right thing to do in a given situation is. For various different reasons, system constraints predominantly, it's very hard for the organization to truly act on those values, because it means that they not just have to take a very hard look in the mirror, but they would have to be willing to shut down a particular product, not do something that they want to do, decrease revenue in this area, decrease margin in like profit margin in this area, alter the way that something works, which would negatively impact their unit economics. So the thing that they really care about, again, they have a narrow goal orientation, which is to maximize shareholder value. That isn't to say that the people within the organization care about that above all else, but the organization itself cares about that above all else. That makes it incredibly difficult for these ethical intentions to be acted upon. And I would argue that although some progress has been made, and we should celebrate that, we should acknowledge that, the delta, the gap, it's as big as the Grand Canyon.
You've made me cautiously optimistic, as someone who may have been a pessimist beforehand. Just before we finish up, do you have, what's the thing that you're most optimistic about in the future, technology-wise?
Technology-wise, wow, that's an incredible question. So, like, I could probably give like a sort of a cliche answer, which would be like, I don't know what AI might tell us about consciousness or something like this. But I actually that's a hugely nuanced area. Think about most of human, so anatomically modern Homo sapiens, somewhere between 150 and 300,000 years old or so, right? For most of that time, we didn't have mirrors. Now you could catch your reflection in some ice or some water, but it was not motionless. It wasn't part of your daily workflow. Like, we then developed mirrors, and it started changing the way, very likely, that we saw ourselves. And I think that some technologies will emerge, and I don't want to categorize them or anything like that, but there are some technologies that will enable us perhaps to actually slow down rather than accelerate, and to ask deeper questions about who we are and how we want to relate to one another and what it is that we want to leave behind. If we are this very unique species, which I believe we are, it would be a real misfortune if we didn't continue and fulfill whatever opportunities may be ahead of us. So I think there are technologies and practices that relate to those technologies that might enable us to see ourselves more deeply. And through that process, we may be able to become collectively wiser. And by becoming collectively wiser, maybe we do actually solve some of our biggest problems. And that would be my hope for the 6-year-old that's outside right now.
Optimistic indeed. Nate, you are partnering with RSA Oceania and Collabs Australia to deliver Ethics in Action free monthly workshops coming up. Tell us how people can find out more.
So if you head to Eventbrite and look up RSA Oceania and type in Ethics in Action, you'll be able to secure a free ticket. We're going to run it every month. If it becomes really popular, I hope it does, we will open up more places. And just really briefly, Vanessa, the idea is people often think ethics is this very esoteric thing that's for armchair philosophers only. And actually, we're all doing ethics all the time. Ethics is really just the process we go through to make decisions about what is most good and right to do in a given situation. And being theoretically informed in that process is really helpful. But my hope is that we can show that there are practical approaches that have a good theoretical grounding, that people can literally take into their workplace the next day, that help them make better decisions about what to do. And maybe we look back and that has in fact helped us in some small way.
I appreciate that. We've been speaking with Nate Kinch, a socio-technology ethicist and the founder of Trustworthy by Design. Thanks so much, Nate.
Thank you for having me.
It is just coming up